The gunshot that killed Grace Anderson's father echoed through the dusty streets of Delta, Colorado, on a scorching August afternoon in 1878, and she knew in that moment her life would never be the same. She stood frozen in the doorway of the general store, watching her father collapse in the street while three men on horseback galloped away, their laughter cutting through the humid air like shards of glass. The sheriff barely investigated, dismissing it as another dispute over mining claims, and within a week Grace found herself utterly alone in a world that had never been kind to women without protection. Her father's debts surfaced like vultures circling carrion. Men she had never seen before appeared at the small house on the edge of town, demanding payment for loans she had not known existed. The bank foreclosed on the property within 2 weeks, and Grace stood in the street with a single carpet bag containing all she owned, watching strangers carry her mother's furniture out the front door. She was 23 years old, unmarried, and according to the whispers that followed her through Delta's dusty streets, utterly unmarriageable. Her father had been a drunk and a gambler, and the town seemed to believe those sins transferred to his daughter like a bloodstain that would not wash clean. Grace found work at the Silver Creek Saloon, serving drinks to miners and cowboys who looked through her rather than at her. She was tall for a woman. With dark auburn hair she kept pinned severely back and gray eyes that had learned not to expect kindness. The other women who worked at the saloon painted their faces and laughed at crude jokes, but Grace kept herself apart, counting her meager wages and dreaming of saving enough to leave Delta behind forever. She had been working there for 3 months when Isaiah Irving walked through the swinging doors on a cold November evening. He was not the handsomest man she had ever seen, but there was something in the way he carried himself that made her pause while pouring whiskey for a table of card players. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and dark brown hair that needed cutting. His eyes were an unusual shade of green, and they swept the room with the wariness of a man who had learned to anticipate trouble. He wore the clothes of a working ranch hand, dusty denim and a worn leather vest, and he carried himself with a quietness that stood in stark contrast to the loud voices filling the saloon. Isaiah sat at a corner table alone, his back to the wall, and when Grace approached to take his order, he looked directly at her face rather than through her. "Whiskey, please," he said, and his voice was rough but polite. "And whatever food you have available." "We have beef stew tonight," Grace said, keeping her voice neutral. "Comes with bread." "That sounds fine, thank you." She brought him his order and expected him to dismiss her, but instead he nodded his thanks and said, "You look tired. Long day." Grace was so surprised by the question that she almost dropped the tray. "Every day is long here," she said after a moment. Isaiah studied her with those green eyes, and she saw something in his expression that might have been understanding. "I expect that is true. Thank you for the food." She left him to his meal and tried not to think about the simple kindness in his voice. Kindness was dangerous. It made you hope, and hope was the cruelest thing of all. But throughout the evening, she found her eyes drifting back to his corner table, where he ate slowly and watched the room with that same quiet wariness. When he left, he placed his payment on the table along with an extra silver dollar. Grace picked it up, feeling the weight of it in her palm and something twisted in her chest. She could not remember the last time someone had given her anything without expecting something in return. Isaiah came back the next night, and the night after that. He always sat at the same corner table, always ordered whiskey and whatever food was available, and always left that extra silver dollar. He did not try to touch her or proposition her like the other men did. He barely spoke beyond placing his order and thanking her for the service. but his presence became something Grace found herself anticipating, a small island of respectability in the chaos of the saloon. On the fourth night, one of the regular customers, a mine foreman named Dutch Cartwright, had too much to drink and decided Grace had been ignoring him for too long. He grabbed her wrist as she passed his table, yanking her down hard enough that she stumbled against him. "Not too good to sit with us, are you?" he slurred, his breath reeking of whiskey and tobacco. "Your daddy owed me money. Maybe you could work off his debt." Grace tried to pull away, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Let go of me." "I do not think so. You have been acting like you are better than everyone here, and I am tired of it." Dutch's grip tightened, his thick fingers digging into her wrist hard enough to bruise. "The lady asked you to let go." Isaiah's voice cut through the noise of the saloon, quiet but carrying an edge that made several nearby conversations stop. Dutch looked up, his eyes narrowing. "This does not concern you, Cowboy. Go back to your table." "I am not going to do that." Isaiah stood now, his hand resting casually on his hip near where Grace could see he wore a pistol. "You are going to let go of her wrist, apologize, and leave her alone. Those are your options." "Or what?" Dutch released Grace and stood, swaying slightly. He was broader than Isaiah, heavier through the shoulders and chest, with the kind of thick muscle that came from years of manual labor. "You think you are some kind of hero? You know what she is. Her father was a worthless drunk who got himself killed, and she is no better. Probably worse." Isaiah's expression did not change, but something flickered in those green eyes. "Last chance to apologize." Dutch laughed and took a swing. Isaiah moved faster than Grace would have thought possible, stepping inside the punch and driving his fist into Dutch's stomach. The bigger man doubled over, gasping, and Isaiah hit him once more, a precise blow to the jaw that sent Dutch sprawling across a table. Cards and glasses went flying, crashing to the floor in a cascade of noise. The saloon erupted. Dutch's friends surged forward, and for a moment Grace thought Isaiah would be overwhelmed. But he moved like water, ducking one punch and deflecting another, his movements efficient and practiced. He did not fight like a brawler but like someone who had been trained, each strike deliberate and controlled. Within moments, two men were on the floor and the others had backed away, reassessing. The saloon owner, a heavy-set man named Morris, came thundering down the stairs from his office. "Enough, everyone calm down or I am calling the sheriff." He looked at Isaiah with narrow eyes. "You, out, we do not tolerate fighting here." "He was defending me," Grace heard herself say. "Dutch grabbed me first." Morris waved a hand dismissively. "I do not care who started it." "Isaiah, you are done here for tonight. Grace, get back to work." Isaiah looked at Grace for a long moment, and she saw him check that she was unhurt before he nodded and walked toward the door. Dutch, still on the floor holding his jaw, spat blood and shouted, "You are done in this town, Cowboy. You hear me? Done." Isaiah did not respond, just pushed through the swinging doors and disappeared into the night. Grace finished her shift in a daze, her wrist throbbing where Dutch had grabbed her. When she finally stepped out into the cold November air, she was surprised to find Isaiah leaning against the post outside, his horse tied nearby. He straightened when he saw her. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "My wrist is sore, but I will be fine. You did not have to wait for me. I wanted to make sure you got home safely. Dutch has friends, and they might not be as willing to let things go as he seemed to be." Grace looked at this stranger who had defended her, who had waited in the cold to make sure she was safe, and felt something crack open inside her chest. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this for me? You do not even know me." Isaiah was quiet for a moment, studying her face in the dim light spilling from the saloon windows. "My mother was alone once," he finally said. After my father died, she had no one to defend her and people took advantage. I swore I would never stand by and watch that happen to someone else if I could prevent it. I do not need a hero, Grace said, but her voice lacked conviction. Good, because I am not one. I am just a cowboy who does not like bullies. He untied his horse's reins. Come on, I will walk you home. That will start talk. There is already talk. At least this way you will be safe. Grace wanted to argue, but she was tired and her wrist hurt, and the idea of walking through Delta's dark streets alone made her stomach twist with anxiety. She nodded and they started walking, Isaiah leading his horse beside them. They walked in silence for several minutes before Grace asked, "Where are you from?" "Kansas originally. My family had a farm there, but after my parents died, I moved west. I have been working ranches wherever I can find work." "How did your mother die?" "She got sick a few winters after my father passed. There was no money for a doctor, and I was too young to do anything but watch her fade away." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Grace heard the old pain beneath the words. "I was 16. I am sorry. It was a long time ago. What about your mother?" "She died when I was 12. Fever took her. It was just my father and me after that, and he was never quite the same. I think he loved her too much to want to keep living without her, so he stopped trying. The drinking and gambling were just slower ways of following her." They reached the boarding house where Grace rented a small room. It was not much, just a narrow bed and a washstand, but it was all she could afford on her wages. She stopped at the bottom of the steps and turned to face Isaiah. "Thank you," she said, "for tonight, for all of it. You do not need to thank me for doing the right thing." He hesitated, then added, "I work at the Double J Ranch about 5 miles north of town. If you ever need help or if Dutch or his friends cause you trouble, you send word and I will come. I cannot ask you to do that. You are not asking. I am offering." He touched the brim of his hat. "Good night, Grace." He knew her name. She had not told him her name, which meant he had asked someone. The realization made her feel strange, vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with danger. "Good night, Isaiah." She watched him mount his horse and ride away into the darkness, and for the first time in months, she felt something other than despair. It was fragile and frightening, but it was there, glowing like an ember in her chest. The next day, Morris told Grace she was fired. He did not give a reason, but she knew it was because of the fight, because she had become more trouble than she was worth. Dutch had influence in Delta, money and connections, and Morris could not afford to alienate him over a serving girl with a dead father and no prospects. Grace stood in the street outside the Silver Creek Saloon with her final wages, $6.30, and felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Without work, she could not pay for her room. Without her room, she would be on the street. Delta had no opportunities for women like her, no respectable work available to someone with her reputation. She could try to find work at one of the other saloons, but word would have spread by now. Dutch would make sure of that. She walked through the town in a daze, her mind spinning through possibilities and finding no solutions. The boarding house owner would give her maybe 3 days before demanding payment or throwing her belongings into the street. She could try to sell what little she had, but it would only buy her a week at most. After that, there were only bad choices, the kind of choices that left you broken and hollow. Grace found herself walking north without consciously deciding to, following the road out of Delta toward where Isaiah had said he worked. It was foolish, she knew. He had been kind, but that did not mean he could solve her problems. Kindness did not pay rent or put food on the table. But she kept walking anyway, because she had nowhere else to go and no one else who might listen. The Double J Ranch sprawled across a wide valley, with a main house, several outbuildings, and extensive corrals where cattle milled and horses stamped restlessly. Grace stood at the edge of the property, suddenly unsure. What was she doing here? What did she expect Isaiah to do? He was just a ranch hand, not a wealthy rancher who could offer her employment. This was a mistake. She turned to leave and a voice called out, "Can I help you?" Grace looked back and saw a woman approaching from the main house. She was in her 40s, with streaks of gray in her dark hair and the kind of weathered face that came from years of outdoor work. She wore practical clothing, trousers and a work shirt, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who owned the land she walked on. "I am sorry for trespassing," Grace said quickly. "I was looking for someone who works here, but I should not have come." "Who are you looking for?" "Isaiah Irving." The woman's expression shifted, becoming curious. "Isaiah is out checking the north fence line, but he should be back within the hour. I am Judith Irving, the owner of this ranch. You are welcome to wait if you like." "Irving, are you related to Isaiah?" "He is my nephew." Or at least, he was like a nephew. His mother was my closest friend, and when she died, I looked for Isaiah for years before finally finding him working a ranch in New Mexico. I convinced him to come work for me about 6 months ago. Judith studied Grace with sharp eyes. "You are Grace Anderson, are you not?" "Yes, madam. How did you know?" "Isaiah mentioned you. He said you were working at the Silver Creek Saloon and that you had helped him feel welcome in Delta." Judith smiled slightly. "He did not mention that you were pretty, but I suppose that is like him. He never was good at talking about his feelings. Come inside. You look cold and I just made coffee." Grace wanted to refuse, but the kindness in Judith's voice was the same kind she had heard in Isaiah's, and she found herself following the older woman into the ranch house. The interior was warm and comfortable, with well-worn furniture and the smell of fresh bread. Judith poured 2 cups of coffee and gestured for Grace to sit at the large kitchen table. "Now," Judith said, settling into a chair across from her. "Tell me what brings you all the way out here looking for my nephew." Grace wrapped her hands around the warm cup, gathering her thoughts. She could lie, make up some excuse, but something about Judith's direct gaze made her want to tell the truth. "I lost my job yesterday. Because of something that happened at the saloon. Isaiah was involved, though it was not his fault. He was defending me from a man who had grabbed me, but the owner decided I was not worth the trouble." She looked down at her coffee. "I have nowhere else to go, no one else who might listen. I know it is foolish to come here. Isaiah barely knows me, and I have no right to ask him for help, but I did not know what else to do." Judith was quiet for a long moment. "Isaiah told me what happened. He rode out early this morning, but before he left, he mentioned that he was worried you might face consequences for the fight. He wanted to go into town and check on you, but I told him to wait, that it might make things worse if he appeared too concerned." She sipped her coffee. "I should have listened to his instincts instead of my own caution. What kind of work are you looking for? Anything honest? I can cook, clean, so work with numbers. I helped my father with his books before he died. I am strong and willing to learn. Can you ride?" "Yes. My father taught me when I was young." "What about cattle? Have you ever worked with livestock?" "Only horses, but I learned quickly." Judith nodded slowly, and Grace could see her thinking, weighing options. "I need someone to help manage the household and keep the books for the ranch. My last housekeeper left 3 months ago to get married, and I have been trying to do everything myself. It is too much. The job would include room and board plus $20 a month. You would have your own cabin, one of the small ones we built for workers. It is not fancy, but it is clean and private. Are you interested?" Grace stared at her, afraid to believe what she was hearing. "You would hire me, just like that? You do not know me. I know that Isaiah defended you, and my nephew is an excellent judge of character. I know that you walked 5 miles in the cold rather than give up. And I know what it is like to be a woman alone in this country, with no one willing to give you a chance. Judith's expression softened. I also know that you are scared but too proud to beg, which tells me you have strength. I could use someone with strength around here. I do not know what to say. Say yes, and then finish your coffee before it gets cold. I will show you the cabin and we can discuss your duties. Yes, Grace whispered. Yes, thank you, I will work hard, I promise. I do not doubt that. Judith stood and carried her cup to the sink. Come on. Let us get you settled before Isaiah gets back and starts worrying. The cabin was small but well built, with a wood stove, a proper bed, a table with 2 chairs, and even a bookshelf. Windows on 2 sides let in plenty of light, and someone had left a colorful quilt folded at the foot of the bed. Grace stood in the doorway, overwhelmed by the reality of having a space that was entirely hers, a place where no one could throw her out or make demands of her. The previous occupant left the quilt and some kitchen supplies, Judith said. If you need anything else, let me know. Meals are typically shared in the main house, but you are welcome to cook here if you prefer privacy. I will expect you to help with breakfast preparation starting at 5 in the morning, and then you will spend most of the day on bookkeeping and correspondence. Evenings are your own unless we have guests, which is rare. When would you like me to start? How about tomorrow? That will give you today to collect your things from town and settle in. Do you need help moving your belongings? I do not have much. Everything I own fits in one bag. Judith's expression tightened with sympathy, but she did not offer platitudes or pity. In that case, consider today your first day. Unpack, rest, explore the ranch. Isaiah should be back soon, and I am sure he will want to know you are here. Dinner is at 6 o'clock. You are expected to join us. She left, and Grace sank onto the bed, her hands trembling. It was too much, too fast. Good things did not happen to her. People did not offer her kindness without expecting something in return. There had to be a catch, some hidden price she would have to pay. But as she sat in the quiet cabin, watching dust motes dance in the afternoon sunlight, she allowed herself to feel the smallest flicker of hope. She was unpacking her few belongings when she heard a horse approach. Through the window, she saw Isaiah dismount near the barn, his movements stiff with exhaustion. He was covered in dust, his shirt dark with sweat despite the November cold, and he moved like someone who had spent hours in hard labor. Grace watched him lead his horse into the barn, and after a moment of internal debate, she left the cabin and followed. The barn was dim and warm, smelling of hay and horses and leather. Isaiah was unsaddling his horse, his back to the door, and he did not hear her approach over the sounds of the animals. Grace cleared her throat and he spun around, his hand instinctively moving toward his pistol before he recognized her. Grace, what are you doing here? Your aunt offered me a job. I am going to be her housekeeper and bookkeeper. Isaiah stared at her, and she watched a dozen emotions cross his face too quickly to name. How did this happen? I came looking for you. I was fired yesterday because of the fight, and I had nowhere else to go. Judith was here when I arrived, and she offered me work. Grace moved closer, studying his face. Did you tell her about me? I mentioned you, yes. I was worried about what might happen after Dutch got involved. I wanted to ride into town this morning to check on you, but Aunt Judith said it might make things worse. He set the saddle on a stand and turned to face her fully. I should have gone anyway. You could not have known Morris would fire me, and even if you had known, what could you have done? You cannot force people to be decent. I could have tried. Isaiah looked frustrated, angry with himself in a way that made Grace's chest ache. You should not have had to come all the way out here alone. But I did, and now I am here, and I have a job and a place to live. For the first time in months, I have something other than fear when I think about tomorrow. That is because of you, Isaiah. because you were kind when no one else was, because you made your aunt understand that I was worth taking a chance on. You were always worth it, Isaiah said quietly. I did not make Aunt Judith see anything that was not already true. They stood looking at each other in the dim barn, and Grace felt something shift between them, something that went beyond gratitude or obligation. She saw the way Isaiah's eyes tracked over her face, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides as though he wanted to reach for her but was holding himself back. I should let you finish with your horse, Grace said, though she made no move to leave. I should go clean up before dinner, Isaiah said, also not moving. The moment stretched between them, full of words neither of them knew how to say. Finally, Isaiah stepped back, breaking whatever spell had held them. I am glad you are here, Grace. I am glad you are safe. So am I. Grace left the barn and walked back to her cabin, her heart beating too fast. She had been in Delta for nearly a year, working at the saloon for 3 months, and in all that time, she had felt nothing but numbness and fear. Now, after one afternoon at the Double J Ranch, she felt alive in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying. She recognized what was growing between her and Isaiah, recognized it and feared it in equal measure. Feelings like this made you vulnerable. They gave other people the power to hurt you. But as she prepared for dinner, changing into her one good dress and pinning her hair up carefully, she could not quite suppress the flutter of anticipation in her stomach. Dinner was a simple affair, beef stew and fresh bread, but it was the best meal Grace had eaten in months. Judith kept the conversation flowing, asking Grace about her background and explaining the workings of the ranch. There were 6 other workers besides Isaiah, all of whom lived in the bunkhouse near the barn. The ranch raised cattle primarily, but also kept horses and a few pigs. Judith had inherited the land from her husband, who had died 5 years earlier, and had been running it alone since then. Isaiah was quiet during the meal, but Grace felt his eyes on her frequently, watching her in a way that made her skin warm. After dinner, she helped Judith clean the dishes, and when they were done, the older woman smiled at her and said, "You are going to work out just fine here, Grace." "I can already tell. I hope so. Thank you again for this opportunity." "Thank Isaiah. He is the one who told me about you, who made me understand that you were someone worth knowing. That boy does not speak highly of people often, so when he does, I listen." Judith dried her hands on a towel and glanced toward the front porch, where Isaiah had gone to smoke. "He lost a lot when his parents died. I think he stopped believing that good things could last. Maybe you can help him remember." Grace did not know how to respond to that, so she simply nodded and excused herself. She stepped out onto the porch and found Isaiah leaning against the railing, looking out over the darkening valley. The first stars were appearing in the deep blue sky, and the air smelled of wood smoke and approaching winter. "Beautiful evening," Grace said softly, not wanting to startle him. "It is." Isaiah glanced at her, then back at the horizon. "I come out here most nights. It helps me think." "What do you think about?" "Everything." "Nothing. Depends on the day." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "Today I was thinking about how strange life is. Yesterday you were serving drinks in a saloon, and today you are here. If I had not gone into town that first night, if I had chosen a different saloon or decided not to go out at all, none of this would have happened. Do you regret it?" "No, not for a second." He turned to look at her directly, and the intensity in his green eyes made Grace's breath catch. "I am glad you are here, Grace. I know I already said that, but I want to make sure you understand. This is not charity and it is not pity. Aunt Judith does not hire people out of kindness. She hired you because she believes you will be an asset to this ranch. You earned this. I have not done anything yet. You survived. You kept going when it would have been easier to give up. That takes strength, and strength is valuable." He looked back at the stars. "My mother used to say that the world is full of people who will try to convince you that you are worthless, but the only opinion that matters is your own. She said that as long as you know your worth, no one can take it from you." She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. "I wish you could have met her. I think she would have liked you." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one. Grace felt something settle inside her, a sense of rightness she had not experienced in years. This place, this moment, felt like the beginning of something important, though she could not have said what. She only knew that standing beside Isaiah in the gathering darkness, she felt less alone than she had since her father died. The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Grace woke before dawn to help Judith prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, then spent her mornings working on the account books and correspondence. The ranch's finances were more complicated than she had anticipated, with records of cattle sales, equipment purchases, payroll, and a dozen other expenses to track. But Grace had always been good with numbers, and she found satisfaction in bringing order to the chaos of scattered receipts and hastily scrawled notes. In the afternoons, she helped with whatever needed doing around the ranch. She learned to make soap and churn butter, to preserve meat and vegetables for the winter, to mend fences and doctor sick animals. Judith was a patient teacher, and Grace absorbed everything like someone who had been starving for purpose. The physical work left her exhausted but satisfied in a way she had never felt while serving drinks at the Silver Creek Saloon. And always, there was Isaiah. He worked from sunrise to sunset, riding fence lines and moving cattle and performing the 100 other tasks required to keep a ranch running. But he always made time to find Grace during the day, to check that she was settling in well, to share a brief conversation or a quiet moment. In the evenings after dinner, they often sat on the porch together, talking about everything and nothing while the stars wheeled overhead. Grace learned that Isaiah was 26, that he had been wandering since he was 16, working ranches from Kansas to New Mexico. He had learned to handle horses from his father and to shoot from a former cavalry soldier who had taught him in exchange for help with farm work. He did not talk much about the years immediately after his mother's death, and Grace did not push. She understood that some memories were too painful to share until trust had been firmly established. She told him about her own childhood, about the mother she barely remembered, and the father she had loved despite his flaws. She described the slow decline after her mother's death, the way her father had tried to drink away his grief and only succeeded in drowning himself. She talked about the loneliness of being the daughter of the town drunk, the way people looked through her as though she did not exist. "I always felt invisible," she said one evening in mid-December, when the winter cold had driven them inside to sit by the fire in the main house. Judith had gone to bed early, leaving them alone in the parlor. "Even before my father died, I felt like I was disappearing, like I was becoming less real every day." "You are not invisible," Isaiah said quietly. He was sitting in the chair across from her, his long legs stretched toward the fire. "You are one of the realest people I have ever met." "How can you say that? You barely know me." "I know that you are honest. You do not pretend to be something you are not, and you do not hide your struggles behind false smiles. That is rare, Grace. Most people spend their whole lives wearing masks." He leaned forward, his green eyes reflecting the firelight. "And I know that when you walk into a room, I notice. You could never be invisible, not to me." Grace's heart hammered against her ribs. They were alone, truly alone for the first time since she had arrived at the ranch. The fire crackled between them, and outside the wind howled around the eaves. It would be so easy to cross the space between them, to close the distance and see what might happen. But fear held her frozen. She had been hurt too many times, rejected and dismissed and judged. What if Isaiah did not feel the same way she did? What if this job, this new life she was building, was contingent on maintaining proper distance? She could not bear to lose what she had found here, even if it meant never knowing what might have been. "It is getting late," she said, standing abruptly. "I should go to my cabin." Something flickered across Isaiah's face, disappointment perhaps, but he stood as well and nodded. "I will walk you back. You do not need to do that. I want to." They walked through the cold darkness, their breath fogging in the frigid air. Grace's cabin glowed warmly in the distance, the fire she had banked before dinner still providing heat. When they reached her door, she turned to thank Isaiah and found him standing closer than she had realized, his face shadowed but his eyes bright. "Grace," he said, and his voice was rough. "I need you to know something. I'm not good with words and I do not have much to offer, but I want you to know that having you here, seeing you every day, it means something to me. You mean something to me." "Isaiah," she whispered, but she did not know what else to say. Her throat felt tight and her eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. "You do not have to say anything. I just needed you to know." He touched her shoulder briefly, a gesture that was over almost before it began, then stepped back. "Good night, Grace." She watched him walk back toward the bunkhouse, a solitary figure against the star-bright snow. When she finally went inside and closed the door, she leaned against it and let the tears fall. They were not tears of sadness, but of something more complicated, a mixture of hope and fear and longing that had no easy name. Christmas came, bringing a brief respite from the ranch work. Judith insisted on decorating the main house with pine branches and cooking a feast that seemed impossibly elaborate for just the three of them. The ranch hands were given the day off, and most had gone into Delta to celebrate, leaving the ranch quiet and peaceful. Grace helped with the cooking, making pies and roasting a turkey and preparing all the side dishes that Judith declared essential to a proper Christmas dinner. Isaiah spent the morning chopping wood and tending to the animals that could not be neglected even on holidays. When he came inside for dinner, his cheeks were red from the cold, and his hair was dusted with snow that had begun falling that morning. They ate together in the warm kitchen, sharing food and stories and laughter. Judith told tales about her late husband, about the early days of building the ranch when they had barely survived on hope and stubbornness. Isaiah contributed his own stories from the years he had spent wandering, carefully editing out the hardest parts but keeping the humor and the small victories. Grace found herself laughing more than she had in years, feeling part of something that resembled a family. After dinner, Judith produced small gifts for both of them. For Isaiah, a new hat to replace the battered one he wore. For Grace, a beautiful wool shawl in deep blue, warm and soft as a cloud. Grace protested that it was too much, but Judith waved away her objections. "You are family now," she said simply. "Family gives gifts at Christmas." Grace excused herself to her cabin to retrieve the gifts she had made, simple things crafted from her limited resources. For Judith, she had sewn a new apron from fabric purchased with her first wages. For Isaiah, she had knitted a scarf, working on it late at night by lamplight, hoping it would be finished in time. She had not been sure about giving it to him, worried it might seem too personal, but Judith's gift-giving had given her courage. When she returned and presented the scarf, Isaiah's expression softened in a way that made her chest ache. "You made this." "It is not much, but I thought you might need it. You are outside so much and the winters here are harsh. It is perfect." He wrapped it around his neck immediately, and Grace felt a flush of pleasure at seeing him wear something she had created. "Thank you, Grace. This means more than you know." The evening ended with them sitting by the fire again, this time all three of them together, talking quietly while the snow continued to fall outside. Grace felt a contentment she had not known was possible, a sense of belonging that filled the empty spaces inside her. When she finally returned to her cabin that night, she carried the feeling with her like a warm coal, something to hold against the darkness. Winter deepened, bringing bitter cold and heavy snows that sometimes made travel to Delta impossible for days at a time. The ranch work continued regardless. Animals still needed tending and wood still needed chopping, and a dozen other tasks could not wait for better weather. Grace learned to navigate the snow in boots Judith gave her, to bundle against the cold in layers of wool, to appreciate the fierce beauty of the landscape even when it was trying to kill her. She and Isaiah grew closer during those long winter months, their friendship deepening into something neither of them had quite named. They fell into the habit of meeting in the barn after dinner, ostensibly so Isaiah could teach her more about handling horses, but really just to have time together away from Judith's kind but observant eyes. They talked about their dreams and their fears, about the people they had been and the people they hoped to become. One evening in late January, when the cold was so intense that the snow crunched like broken glass beneath their feet, Grace asked Isaiah why he had never married. They were in the barn, where several horses nickered softly in their stalls, and Grace was brushing down a mare while Isaiah mended a bridle. He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer, but finally he said, "I never stayed in one place long enough. And I never met anyone I wanted to stay for, not until recently." Grace's hands stilled on the brush. "Recently, Grace?" Isaiah set down the bridle and stood, crossing the space between them. He stopped just out of reach, and in the lamplight his face was serious, almost solemn. "I think you know how I feel about you. I have tried to be respectful, to give you space to settle in without pressure, but I cannot keep pretending that you are just a friend or a fellow worker. You are more than that to me. You have been since the first night I saw you at the Silver Creek Saloon." Grace's heart was beating so hard she could barely hear over the rush of blood in her ears. "Isaiah, I do not understand. Why me? I am nothing special. I have no family, no money, no prospects. Why would you want someone like me? Because you are strong. Because you are honest. Because when you smile, which you do not do nearly often enough, it feels like the sun coming out." He took a step closer. "Because I see you, Grace. I see all of you, not just the parts you think are acceptable, and I choose you. I have been choosing you every day since that first night." "I have never been chosen," she whispered, and her voice broke on the words. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. "Not by my mother who died, not by my father who drank himself to death, not by anyone in that town who looked through me like I was made of glass. I do not know how to be chosen." Isaiah closed the final distance between them and cupped her face gently in his calloused hands. "Then let me teach you. Let me show you what it feels like to be wanted, to be valued, to be loved." "Loved?" Grace could barely breathe. "You love me?" "Yes. I love you. I have been in love with you for months, and I was a coward for not saying it sooner." His thumbs wiped away her tears with infinite gentleness. "You do not have to say anything back. I just needed you to know, needed you to understand that you are not alone anymore. You are chosen, Grace, by me. Every day, for as long as you will have me, I choose you." Grace made a sound that was half sob, half laugh, and then she was reaching for him, pulling him close and burying her face in his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her while she cried, while all the fear and loneliness and grief of the past year poured out of her. He did not try to quiet her or tell her it would be all right. He just held her, solid and warm and real, and let her feel everything she had been holding back. When the storm of emotion finally passed, Grace pulled back enough to look up at him. His shirt was wet with her tears, and his expression was so tender it made her want to cry all over again. "I love you too," she said, her voice hoarse. "I have been afraid to admit it, even to myself, but I love you. I think I started loving you that first night when you looked at me like I was a person worth seeing." Isaiah smiled, and it transformed his whole face. Then he bent his head and kissed her, soft and careful, a question and an answer all at once. Grace kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into the press of her lips against his, the warmth of his mouth, the way he held her like she was something precious. It was her first real kiss, and it felt like coming home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Isaiah rested his forehead against hers. "I want to marry you, Grace. I want to build a life with you, a real life. But I know it is too soon, and I do not want to rush you into anything." "It is too soon," Grace agreed, though part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to bind herself to him before this dream could dissolve. "But ask me again in the spring. Ask me when the snow melts and the world comes back to life. Ask me then, and I will give you my answer." "Spring," Isaiah said, and he kissed her again. "I can wait until spring." They kept their relationship quiet at first, not quite secret but not announced either. Judith knew, of course. She was too observant to miss the way Isaiah and Grace looked at each other, the way they found excuses to be together, the glow that seemed to surround them both. But she said nothing, just smiled to herself and gave them space to navigate their feelings without an audience. The winter slowly loosened its grip, and by late February the worst of the cold had passed. The ranch hands returned to more extensive work, moving cattle and beginning repairs on buildings and fences that had suffered during the harsh months. Grace continued her work in the house and with the books, but she also spent more time outside, learning to ride better and helping with tasks that had once seemed impossibly difficult. She and Isaiah stole moments together whenever they could, quick kisses in the barn, long conversations under the stars, quiet mornings before the rest of the ranch woke. Grace felt herself unfurling like a flower that had been frozen, opening to the warmth of being loved. Isaiah was patient and gentle and constant, showing her through 100 small actions that his words had not been empty promises. In March, when the first green shoots began appearing in the meadows, they rode out together one Sunday afternoon to a high valley Isaiah wanted to show her. The ride took almost 2 hours, climbing through pine forests and across snowmelt streams, but when they finally emerged into the valley, Grace understood why he had brought her there. It was beautiful, a perfect bowl of land surrounded by mountains, with a clear creek running through it and meadow grass already beginning to green. Wildflowers dotted the landscape, early blooms of purple and yellow that had pushed through the last of the snow. The sky overhead was impossibly blue, and the air smelled of pine and earth and growing things. "It is perfect," Grace breathed, dismounting and walking into the meadow. "How did you find this place?" "I was chasing a stray cow last fall and ended up here. I have been waiting all winter to show it to you." Isaiah tied their horses and followed her. "I have been thinking. Aunt Judith has been talking about expanding the ranch, maybe buying some of the land that borders her property. This valley is not part of the Double J, but I checked and it is unclaimed. Anyone could file for it. Are you thinking of claiming it?" "I am thinking we could claim it, together." Isaiah took her hands and his green eyes were serious. "I know I said I would wait until spring to ask, but Grace, I cannot wait any longer. I love you. I want to spend my life with you. I want to build a house right here in this valley and raise horses and children and grow old watching the seasons change. Will you marry me?" Grace looked at this man who had chosen her, who had seen her at her lowest and loved her anyway, and felt certainty settle over her like a benediction. "Yes," she said, and her voice rang clear in the mountain air. "Yes, I will marry you." Isaiah whooped with joy and picked her up, spinning her around while she laughed breathlessly. When he set her down, he kissed her with an enthusiasm that left them both dizzy, and then he produced a ring from his pocket. It was simple, a thin gold band with a small but brilliant diamond, and as he slipped it onto her finger, Grace felt tears prick her eyes again. "It was my mother's," Isaiah said. "The only thing of hers I still have. Aunt Judith kept it safe for me all these years, and when I told her I wanted to marry you, she insisted I have it to give you." "It is beautiful," Grace whispered, watching the stone catch the sunlight. "I will treasure it." They spent the rest of the afternoon in the valley, making plans and dreaming out loud. Isaiah wanted to build a house with large windows to let in the light. Grace wanted a garden where she could grow vegetables and flowers. They both wanted horses, several of them, and maybe some cattle. They would stay at the Double J until they had saved enough money to file the claim and start building, probably a year or more. It was not a grand plan, but it was theirs, and it felt perfect in its simplicity. When they rode back to the ranch that evening, they found Judith waiting on the porch with a smile. "I take it she said yes," she called when she saw the ring on Grace's finger. "She did," Isaiah said, dismounting and helping Grace down. His hand lingered on her waist, and Grace leaned into him, marveling at how natural it felt. "Well, it is about time. I was starting to worry you two would dance around each other forever." Judith hugged them both. "I could not be happier. You are both exactly what the other needs, and I am honored to have you as family. Now come inside. We need to plan a wedding." The wedding took place on a warm day in early May, in the meadow near the ranch house where wildflowers had burst into full bloom. The ceremony was small, just Judith and the ranch hands, and a few of Judith's friends from neighboring properties. The circuit preacher who rode through Delta once a month agreed to perform the ceremony, and Judith had invited him to stay at the ranch specifically for this purpose. Grace wore a dress Judith had helped her make, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. She had woven wildflowers into her hair, and when she walked out to meet Isaiah, she saw his breath catch in his throat. He wore his best clothes, dark pants and a white shirt, with the scarf she had made him around his neck. His eyes never left her face as she approached, and when she took his hand, she felt the slight tremble in his fingers that matched her own. The ceremony itself was brief, a traditional exchange of vows and rings. But when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Isaiah bent to kiss her, Grace felt the earth shift beneath her feet. This was real. She was married to the man she loved, the man who had chosen her when no one else had. She was no longer alone, no longer invisible. She was Grace Irving, and she was chosen. The celebration lasted into the evening, with food and music and dancing under the stars. Grace had never felt so happy, surrounded by people who genuinely cared for her, wrapped in Isaiah's arms as they swayed to fiddle music. When the party finally wound down and guests began departing or heading to bed, Isaiah took Grace's hand and led her to his cabin, which had been cleaned and decorated with more wildflowers. Inside, with the door closed behind them and the world shut out, Isaiah pulled Grace into his arms. "Hello, wife," he murmured against her hair. "Hello, husband," Grace replied, and the word felt strange and wonderful on her tongue. They made love slowly, carefully, learning each other with patience and tenderness. Grace had been nervous, but Isaiah was gentle, taking his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, and Grace traced patterns on Isaiah's chest while he played with her hair. "I never imagined I could have this," she said quietly. "A home, a husband, a real future. There were days in Delta when I could not see past the next morning, and now I have everything." "We both do," Isaiah said. "I spent 10 years wandering, convinced I did not deserve to put down roots. And then I found you, and suddenly I could see what my life could be. You gave me that, Grace. You gave me a reason to stop running. We gave it to each other." They talked long into the night, making more plans, sharing more dreams. They would save their wages for the next year, living frugally and putting away every cent they could spare. Next spring, they would file the claim on the valley and begin building their house. It would be hard work, but they would do it together, just as they would face everything else life brought them. The following months passed in a blur of work and happiness. Grace continued managing the household and books for Judith, while also beginning to help more with the ranch's daily operations. She learned to brand cattle and doctor sick animals and handle a rope. Isaiah taught her to shoot, patiently correcting her stance and aim until she could hit a target reliably. She would never be fast, but she was accurate, and Isaiah said that was more important anyway. They fell into the rhythms of married life, small domestic rituals that bound them together. Isaiah always made sure Grace's coffee was exactly how she liked it. Grace always mended his torn clothing before he even asked. They shared their hopes and fears, their good days and bad, their laughter and their rare arguments. And every night, they fell asleep wrapped around each other, grateful for the warmth and solidity of the other's presence. By autumn, Grace realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but when her monthly courses failed to arrive for the third time, she knew. The realization filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She wanted Isaiah's child, wanted to build a family with him, but she remembered her own mother dying, remembered how fragile life could be for women in childbirth. She told Isaiah one evening as they sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sun set over the mountains. "I am going to have a baby," she said simply, and watched his face transform. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be. I think the baby will come in the spring, probably March or early April." Isaiah pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he whispered. "We are going to have a baby. Grace, that is wonderful. That is the best news I have ever received." "You are not worried. Of course I am worried. I am terrified, but I am also happier than I have ever been." He pulled back to look at her face. "Are you worried?" "Yes. My mother died from fever after I was born. I know it does not mean the same will happen to me, but I cannot stop thinking about it. I will not let anything happen to you. We will find the best doctor in Colorado if we have to. We will make sure you have everything you need. You are going to be fine, Grace. You are going to be fine, and our baby is going to be healthy and beautiful and perfect." Grace wanted to believe him, to trust in his confidence, but fear had sunk its claws deep. Still, she smiled and let him hold her, and tried to focus on the joy rather than the worry. Judith was delighted by the news, immediately beginning to prepare for the baby's arrival. She dug out blankets and clothing she had saved from her own children who had died in infancy, losses she rarely spoke about. Seeing them made Grace realize that Judith understood her fear better than she had known. They spent the long winter evenings sewing baby clothes and knitting blankets, preparing for the new life that would arrive with the spring. As Grace's belly grew, Isaiah became almost comically protective. He refused to let her lift anything heavy or ride horseback, or do any of the harder ranch work. Grace chafed under his overprotection at first, but she also understood it came from love and fear, so she tried to be patient. They used the long winter months to plan for the house they would build, making lists and sketches and deciding on every detail. The baby came on a mild day in late March, arriving 2 weeks earlier than expected. The labor was long and difficult, lasting almost 20 hours. Isaiah stayed with Grace the entire time, holding her hand and wiping her forehead and whispering encouragement. The midwife Judith had hired from Delta tried to send him out, saying childbirth was women's business, but Grace refused to let him go. She needed him there, needed his strength and his steady presence. When the baby finally arrived, a healthy boy with a strong pair of lungs and a shock of dark hair, Grace wept with relief and exhaustion. Isaiah cut the cord with shaking hands, and when the midwife placed the baby in Grace's arms, he sat beside her on the bed and touched his son's tiny hand with wonder. "He is perfect," Isaiah said, his voice rough with emotion. "Grace, you did it. He is perfect. What should we name him?" Grace asked, studying the baby's red, wrinkled face. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but never quite decided. Now, looking at their son, Isaiah said, "What about William? After your father?" Grace felt tears prick her eyes again. Her father had been flawed, troubled, unable to save himself from his own demons. But he had also loved her in his way, had tried his best even when his best was not enough. "William Isaiah Irving," she said. "I think that is perfect." Little William was an easy baby, content to sleep and eat and observe the world with solemn dark eyes. Grace recovered quickly from the birth, her body bouncing back with the resilience of youth. By the time William was 2 months old, she was back to helping with ranch work, though she now carried the baby in a sling while she went about her tasks. That summer, they finally filed the claim on their valley. The paperwork was complicated, requiring trips to Delta and meetings with government officials, but by August, the land was officially theirs. 160 acres of mountain meadow and forest, a place where they could build the life they had dreamed of. They began construction in September, after the worst of the summer heat had passed. Isaiah and several of the other ranch hands worked on building the house, a modest structure with 2 bedrooms and a large main room. It took months of hard labor, cutting and hauling timber, mixing mortar, fitting stones for the foundation. Grace helped when she could, though caring for William took most of her time and energy. By Christmas, the house was finished enough to move into. It was rough still, with gaps that would need chinking and floors that were bare boards, but it was theirs. They moved their few belongings up to the valley, and on their first night in the new house, they lay in bed with William sleeping in a cradle beside them and marveled at what they had built. "I still cannot quite believe this is real," Grace said, staring up at the ceiling beams Isaiah had shaped himself. "That we have a home and a son and a future." "It is real," Isaiah said. "You are real, I am real, William is very real, especially at 3 in the morning when he wants to be fed. This is our life, Grace, the one we chose together." "I choose you," Grace said, repeating words that had become something of a ritual between them. "Every day I choose you." "I choose you every day," Isaiah replied, and he kissed her in the darkness of their new home in the valley that was theirs, under mountains that stood eternal watch. The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. They built the ranch slowly, adding animals and outbuildings and making improvements to the house. Grace proved to have a talent for training horses, and Isaiah's cattle herd grew steadily. They worked from dawn until dark most days, but they worked together, building something that would last. William grew into a sturdy, curious boy, and when he was 3, Grace became pregnant again. This time she was less frightened, more confident in her body's ability to bring new life into the world. Their second son, Thomas, arrived on a snowy February morning with less drama than his brother, seemingly eager to get on with life. 2 years after that came a daughter they named Judith, after the woman who had given them both a chance at her real life. The original Judith, now in her 60s, cried when they told her the name they had chosen, and became a devoted grandmother figure to all 3 children. The ranch prospered, slowly but steadily. They never became wealthy, but they had enough. Enough food, enough warmth, enough joy. Grace looked back sometimes on the woman she had been in Delta, serving drinks at the Silver Creek Saloon and feeling invisible, and marveled at how far she had come. That scared, lonely girl seemed like someone from another life entirely. Isaiah also changed over the years, the wariness fading from his eyes, replaced by contentment. He still had moments of darkness, times when the ghosts of his past rose up to haunt him, but Grace had learned to recognize those times and hold space for him to work through them. Just as he had been patient with her fears, she was patient with his. By the time their children were grown, with William taking over most of the ranch work, and Thomas heading off to study veterinary medicine, and little Judith becoming a teacher in Delta, Grace and Isaiah were in their late 40s. They had gray in their hair and lines on their faces, scars from years of hard work and harder weather. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the people they had been that first night in the Silver Creek Saloon, when a lonely cowboy had looked at a scared woman and chosen to see her worth. One evening in late summer, 20 years after their wedding, they rode back up to the valley where Isaiah had proposed. The meadow was just as beautiful as Grace remembered, full of wildflowers and birdsong and the whisper of wind through tall grass. They sat together on a blanket, watching the sun paint the mountains gold and purple, and Grace leaned against Isaiah's shoulder. "You ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Choosing me, I mean. You could have had an easier life with someone else, someone who came with a dowry and connections, and a family name that meant something." Isaiah was quiet for a moment, and then he laughed, a warm, rich sound that still made Grace's heart flutter even after 2 decades. "Grace Irving, you are the most stubborn, frustrating, wonderful woman I have ever known, and I have never regretted choosing you for a single second. Not when money was tight, not when the winters were hard, not when the children were sick, or the cattle died, or anything else. You were worth every challenge, every struggle, every moment of doubt. You were worth everything." "I choose you," Grace whispered, the words as true now as they had been in that barn so many years ago. "Every day I choose you." "I choose you every day," Isaiah replied, and he kissed her as the sun set over the valley that had become their kingdom, their legacy, their proof that 2 broken people could find wholeness in each other. They had 7 more years together before Isaiah's heart gave out one cold January morning. He died as he had lived, quietly and without fuss, simply failing to wake up beside Grace after a lifetime of mornings together. Grace grieved him fiercely, the loss carving a hollow space in her chest that never quite filled. But she also celebrated him, celebrating the life they had built, and the love they had shared, and the family they had created. She lived another 12 years after Isaiah's passing, long enough to see grandchildren grow and new great-grandchildren arrive. She taught them all about their grandfather, about the quiet cowboy who had looked at a woman everyone else had dismissed and chosen to see her value. She told them how he had taught her that being chosen was not about being perfect or having the right family or the right name. Being chosen was about being seen, truly seen, and loved for exactly who you were. Grace Anderson Irving died peacefully in her sleep on a spring morning, surrounded by wildflowers and the sounds of the ranch still operating around her. Her children and grandchildren gathered in the valley to lay her to rest beside Isaiah, and as they stood around the graves, They told stories about the remarkable love their grandparents had shared. William, now gray-haired himself, stood at the edge of the gathering and looked out over the valley his parents had claimed and tamed and made beautiful. He thought about his mother's words, the story she had told him many times over the years about the night his father had proposed. "I've never been chosen," she had whispered, tears streaming down her face. And his father, that quiet man of few words, had cupped her face and replied with absolute certainty, "I choose you every day." It was a simple promise, but they had kept it. Through 27 years of marriage and all the challenges that came with building a life in harsh country, they had chosen each other. Every single day, they had chosen love over fear, hope over despair, together over alone. And in doing so, they had built something that would last long after they were gone. Not just a ranch or a family name, but a legacy of love. A reminder that the most powerful thing a person could do was choose to see the value in someone else, to believe in them when they could not believe in themselves, to love them not despite their brokenness, but because of the courage it took to keep going when everything seemed hopeless. As the sun set over the Colorado mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson and purple, William looked at his parents' graves and smiled. They were together again, the lonely cowboy and the invisible woman who had found each other in the chaos of the Wild West and built something beautiful. They had been chosen, and they had chosen in return, and that had made all the difference. The family eventually dispersed, heading back to their homes and their lives, but the valley remained. The house still stood, solid and strong, a testament to what two people could build when they worked together. The meadow still bloomed with wildflowers every spring, and the creek still sang its endless song, and the mountains stood eternal watch over the place where Grace and Isaiah Irving had dared to believe in love. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind was just right, you could almost hear them, the woman who had never been chosen and the cowboy who had chosen her every day, their voices carrying on the breeze like a promise, like a prayer, like the answer to a question no one knew they were asking. What does it mean to be loved? What does it mean to be chosen? It means being seen. It means being valued. It means having someone look at you at your worst moment and decide you are worth fighting for. It means building a life together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of grace at a time. It means everything.